Solve by completing the square. So I only have a few examples of this just to give you an idea of how this is done, but really it's just going to take some practice here. So we've learned how to solve by factoring, and this one we can see it's pretty easy that we can factor this. What multiplies the negative 24 and adds the negative 2, well, that's negative 6 and 4. I want to use this to show you that there are other ways it could be done. You also learned how to solve by square root, and that involved getting whatever is squared by itself and taking the square root of each side. So this is going to kind of use both. So the first thing that we're going to do here is add 24 to each side. We want anything with an x on the same side and everything else to the other. So now we have x squared minus 2x equals 24. So we're going to make this side, we're going to add to it to make it something that we can factor. So we need to add another number here. And in order to do that, if we do this correctly, we can make this into this form where we add, so let's just say c right now, to each side. Now the idea is to be able to factor this into a plus some number squared, and then we'll take the square root of each side. So in order to do this, what we need to do is take the x term. In this case it's negative 2. So we'll still call that b, and we're going to divide that in half. So in this case it would be negative 2 divided by 2, which equals negative 1. This number right here, we're going to square that. That's the name, complete the square. We're going to square that and add that to each side. Now we can do this because properties of equations, whatever we add to one side, we have to add to the other, and we're not changing any values. We're just making it look different. So now when we do this, if I wanted to write it out on the left side in this form, I could. But to be honest, I would rather keep it in this form, and I'm going to show you why. Why we do that is because we can take this x leading term and the end term and put it as x. This is minus 1, so we go minus 1, put that in parentheses and square. What we essentially did to the left side is factor. We factored this, and this is actually a perfect square. It's a perfect square trinomial. If we take x minus 1 times x minus 1, we will get this beginning part here. So now let's just clean up the right side. Well, I know negative 1 squared is just 1, so 24 plus 1 is 25. So now we have to have it in a form that we should know where to go from here. Now we can take the square root of each side. So we completed the square by adding this negative 1 squared to each side, and now we can go with one of the older ways to do this and take the square root of each side once we have it in this form. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So the square root and the square cancel out. We get x minus 1 on the left and plus or minus 5 on the right. Don't forget about your plus or minus. So we have two equations. X minus 1 equals 5. X minus 1 equals negative 5. Therefore x equals 4 and x equals negative 6. Oh, sorry about that. So x equals 6 and x equals negative 4. And those are our two answers. Now obviously completing the square for this particular problem is an ideal because it takes a little bit of time. It's a lot easier to factor. That's why you're getting 3 different ways to be able to do this, because some ways are more beneficial than others. So let's take a look at some other problems that aren't easily factorable, where completing the square will work better. Okay, so number 2 here. Again, we just got to get this process down, and it will take practice. So everything with an x, we want on the same side. X squared plus 12x, we're going to add 54 to each side. We're going to take the term in front of the x, so basically b, and divide it by 2. In this case, it's 12 over 2, which is 6. Again, hopefully in this step right here, you can kind of do in your head. If you need to write it down, there's nothing wrong with that. So 6 is what we're going to add, and we're actually going to make it 6 squared to each side. So we got x squared plus 12x plus 6 squared. 54 plus 6 squared. So on the left side, since I kept it like this, I can go right to x, and it's a positive 6, so plus 6 squared equals, 54 plus 6 squared, that's really 54 plus 36, which is 90. Now I can go ahead and take the square root of each side. Now the square root of 90 doesn't come out as nicely as the last one, so we just have to write x plus 6 equals plus or minus. This is the same thing as 9 times 10, and I know the square root of 9 is 3, so 3 square root of 10. Get x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 6 from each side. 6 plus or minus 3 square root of 10. And this implies right here that there's 2 answers, and 2 answers are what we need. So for number 2, completing the square is a little bit better than using it over here, because this one factored nice and neat, and if you get an actual number, it means that factoring is easier. But here for number 2, we get this weird number because the beginning just doesn't factor nicely. So why don't you pause the video, give number 3 a try and follow the process. The process is what you need to get down. Once you can do that, it's fairly easy. Okay, we have the x's by itself already, so we can take b, which is negative 8, and divide it by 2. So we're going to take negative 4, and we're going to square that on each side. Can see how I'm adding the negative 4 squared. So we're always adding that to each side, because when we take anything squared, it's going to end up being positive. The nice thing is when I write it like this over here, x, because it's a negative 4, now it's minus 4 squared equals negative 8 plus, this would turn into a positive 16, so overall it's a positive 8. Now we're ready to take the square root of each side. So I have x minus 4 equals plus or minus 8. X minus 4 equals plus or minus, square root of 8 is the same thing as 4 times 2. The square root of 4 is 2. 2 square root of 2. And then get x by itself. So add 4 to each side. I get x equals 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 2. Again, this means 2 answers. So we do have 2 separate answers for 2 different degrees that we have. So that's completing the square, and can be very difficult until you get this process down. So like I said earlier, just take some practice. So give the practice sheet a try, and raise your hand if you have any questions.